Hi, welcome back to another episode of Unique Moments where I talk about things from my unique perspective. So we're back and we're continuing with the universal laws. And I believe this is law number 7, and it's the law of compensation. But before we get into the law, we're going to do a card. I decided to do a virtual card today. I put all my decks away and I just quite frankly didn't feel like getting one out. So I have this app and we pulled a card. They do like a card of the day. It's very cute. And the card that I got today was the High Priestess. And I thought that was interesting. So all of the tarot cards, they correlate to zodiac signs, and the High Priestess correlates to Pisces, and I'm a Pisces. So I feel like I pulled my card today. But the High Priestess basically just says, she's all about your subconscious and kind of like your inner thoughts, your inner world, and really trusting your intuition and maybe hidden things or things that are kind of being covered up that either maybe you're not seeing right now or that just haven't been brought to your attention. So with that, for me, I think it's just saying to pay attention to your intuition or my intuition. I feel like a lot of the times intuitively I know things and then I doubt myself and I think that I don't, and I'm right. 99% of the time, I'm right. So if you have a hunch about something, or if there's something that you're not seeing that you need to look at, trust your intuition. Trust, because it's yourself. Your intuition is like your higher self. They know what you don't know, that gut feeling, that just feeling that you can't describe why you have to do this thing or why you believe this or why something that you know, but maybe no one taught it to you, or maybe there's no proof for it. Cause I get that a lot. I just know my inner knowing, like, I know this to be true. I know this is a fact. I don't need anybody to tell me. I don't need to see any proof. I don't need to Google. I don't need to do anything. I just have a feeling and I know. And women's intuition is a real thing. I think men have it too, but there's something about a woman's intuition that's just crazy spot on. So listen to your intuition today and thank yourself later. So the law of compensation, it's not necessarily about being compensated money wise, but just in life. It's almost kind of similar to the law of cause and effect. So the law of compensation basically says that what you get, basically you get what you give, right? And that is very apparent in just everyday life. You get what you give. And specifically, it says you get what you give in proportion. So if you're doing something of high value, or if you're doing a service, if you're giving somebody something that is of high value, you're going to be returned something of either equal or greater value. It's probably not going to be lesser value. But the thing is, it's all about intention, right? So it's not necessarily saying the harder you work and the more you do, the more you'll get. Because it's okay, what intention are you doing it with? What intention are you working with? Are you doing all this work and working so hard so you can get the recognition that you deserve, or so people will finally pay attention, or so people will give you this thing? That's the wrong intention. It's the wrong way to go about it. So you're not going to get back everything that's worth all the effort that you're putting in. So it's not necessarily the more efforting you do and the more work you do, the more you'll get. It's about the value in what you're doing, the value in what you're giving. So, if you're feeding the homeless, right? In a very humble way, like maybe you take a part of your paycheck and you give it out every Sunday or every whatever you do. Um, that's not to say that the amount of money that you spend is going to come back to you and equal of more value, but that service that you did, that deed that you did, that is going to be compensated in some way, shape, or form. It might not come back in the form of somebody giving you something. It might come back in like, we don't know how it's going to come back, but it does come back to you. in that realm of how much value you gave. Now, if you just like set aside $1, let's say you set aside $1 every month to give to the homeless man on the corner. That's not to say that that's not a good deed. That's not to say that that's not a good action. But like, if you're expecting God to like look down on you, like, oh, you're doing such a good job, like feeding the homeless, taking care of my people. No, like it doesn't work like that. Does not. You might be compensated, but don't expect this big like recognition or return on that investment. Basically, kind of like that too. Your return on your investment, how much you invest is how much you return. I feel like it can also be broken down to that, and also a law of reaping what you're sowing, because it's always going to come back to you. And compensation doesn't always have to be money. You can be compensated for the love you give. How much love are you giving out? How much kindness are you giving out? How much compassion are you giving out on a day-to-day basis? You'll be compensated for that. How much flexibility are you giving out? Are you flexible with people? Do you give people wiggle room? Do you give people grace? Do you give people grace to move freely and exist as a human being and not set expectations and parameters and control how things should be? If you do that, if you're giving that out to people, then you will be given that in return. You will be compensated with that in return, with flexibility, with more love, with kindness, with grace, with gratitude. And then also it can come in the form of experiences. What type of life are you living? To get down to it, what type of life are you living? If you're playing it small and you're playing it safe and you don't take risk, or you're just kind of living, being, existing, it would be kind of like super, super out of the ordinary for something like crazy, extraordinary, wild to happen in your life, because you're not sowing those seeds. Like, you're not giving the energy of taking risk. You're not giving the energy of doing big things, of doing crazy things. So like nothing really crazy is going to happen to you. I mean, miracles happen every day. I believe that miracles happen. Um, Anything can happen, truly, quite frankly. But the law of compensation says you will be compensated for what you give. So what you get is what you give, almost in direct proportion. And I think a key thing here, or not a key thing, but one thing I like to do, because I think when you think about it that way, like, oh, I reap what I sow, or I get what I give, it can be easy to get caught up in an intention of like doing something for something. Like, I'm going to do this action to get this because I know this is how the law works. This is how the universe works. And it's like, that's a little trap, I think, because then your intentions aren't pure. Then you're doing it as a means to an end. You're not doing it as a means itself. And that can get tricky, because then it's like, okay, it's like, what is your motive? Like, what is your motive here? Are you doing it to get something? Or are you doing it because your heart's in it? Are you doing it because you would do it anyway if you weren't getting anything back? And so one of the things I like to do is just kind of like build up my spiritual bank, if you will. When you do things without an expectation for anything, I feel like that kind of builds up. You're putting deposits in your spiritual bank, if that makes sense. If you're not keeping track of, just not keeping track, I'm not keeping track of how many times I took this person out to dinner, or the gifts I buy this person, or how many times I'm extending the invite as a friend, or how many times I'm picking up the slack at work, or how many times I'm going the extra mile, just going the extra mile for anything, and not really counting how many times you're doing that, or always complaining about being the one who's always doing something. It's going to be returned to you. And you might not see it today, you might not see it tomorrow, you might not even see it in a year from now. But I think when you live like that, and when you're kind of stacking things on top of things without thinking about it, though, I think that's the key. Like, you have to kind of do it and just forget about it, and do it and say, I'm not doing this so I can get something back. I'm just doing it because it's in my heart to do, it's in my heart to give, then that's always going to be returned back to you. It's always going to be fully compensated back to you in equal or more proportion. And then it also works the other way too. Like you can be compensated in equal or lesser proportion. That's when like stinginess, or like when you're doing things out of spite, when you're doing things that you don't really want to do, but you're kind of doing them anyway. And it's like you're doing it in a negative energy, like in a nasty energy. Like if you're giving to someone, but you really don't want to give it to them, but you're doing it out of obligation, like that's it's not going to be negatively compensated back to you, but it could be of equal or lesser value. Like it's not like, oh, I'm doing this to be a good person even though I don't want to do it. Like that intention is written all over it. That intention is going to seep through whatever the thing that is going to be given back to you. Or when you're just being what's the word? Like withholding. Like say you're withholding things. Like say you have information about something. And I'm not talking about a secret. Like if someone told you a secret, keep that secret. But if you have information, or if you have information, if you have tools, if you have insight, if you have money, money's tricky, but if you have something of value that you could give somebody, but you choose not to give it for whatever reason, because you don't have to have a reason. Everything doesn't have to be justified. But if you choose not to give it and you can give it anyway, that intention is also written over it. If you choose not to give it, but you could give it anyway and you don't, whether you have a good reason or not, I don't know, you could be compensated well if you have a good reason. But the way the law seems to work is like, that's going to come back to you. So maybe the next time someone has something of value to offer you that they could give you, they just don't do it. And you're like, why? I don't understand. It's so easy. It's so easy. You could have just did this one little thing for me and it wouldn't even have been, but like, you didn't do that one little thing for them. And maybe it's not even in the same year. Maybe it's not even in the same group that this happens, but that's how things are interconnected. There might be no explanation for why this person is not meeting you halfway, or for why this person is not giving you what they could so easily give you, and they're just not doing it. And you don't know why, and they don't know why, but they just don't want to do it. And you can't rack your brain on, it would literally be so simple if you just did this one thing for me, but it's like you're reaping your spiritual karma of when you didn't do that one thing for them. So that's kind of how the law of compensation works, and very similar to the cause and effect. I think of both of them as sowing and reaping, but on different levels. So that's all I got for the law of compensation. Until next time.